the sun from integral theory to Carl Jung's collective unconscious with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Claire Graves' spiral dynamics, which was once a lot more messy. Of course, I look more like Claire Graves right now, but I hope in the future it will become much more clear for people to see, and maps will be drawn up to make it concise. So, if you are aware of spiral dynamics, you know there's colors like blue, purple, red, and beige, purple, red, and blue. And in the integral model, most people align them fairly perfectly, so that's what I do. And so it becomes infrared, magenta, red, and amber. Okay, and the colors, I'll try to say the colors of each once, but I'll probably stick to the spiral colors depending on the context. But we shall see what I decide. I haven't made up my mind. Now, what I discovered is that there are 4 collective shadows, or there are 4 desires that make up the collective shadows. So it isn't just you have a collective shadow or archetype. The archetype is created by desire, because desire is what forms identity. You want to be something so you can survive. And so you have 4 main desires. You have sadism, which sounds kind of crazy, but it really refers to dominance. You want to be on top. You can see how that connects to survival. And then there's offshoots of sadism, which are sadism directed inwards, sadism, domineering so that everyone is the same, and domineering to make sure that everyone is different. And why that happens will be discussed. Then you got PD, which refers to pedophilia, incest, INC, BT is bestiality, and then you have categories that really apply to later on mostly, which is null, personalize, and gravitate. Because the ego changes as you pass stage clear, because there is no real, the ego is just like a smoke as opposed to something that is tangible. It's more flexible. It becomes whatever it needs to be and doesn't really care what others think of it necessarily. And the attachments are kind of remnants from lost ages long past, as opposed to the ego being something significant. And it becomes lost desires that you haven't gotten or thought about in a while, and things that linger, whether it's addictions or just neuroses, or stuff that develops because of cognitive development, where you don't worry about having neuroses, which also looks like a neuroses. You just always had it. You just never let people see that part of you. So there's stuff like that. Okay, so let's go through the stages. So in beige or magenta, there's no stage like this, but it always includes purple. But you have an instinctive mindedness every 4 stages. And I put this under the category of SD. Later on, I discover something interesting, that each SD is most likely SD31, enforced conformity. Next, we have magenta, the animistic zone, so you have bestiality. That's why there's so much focus on animals. Later on, I discover that the bestiality is not actually real bestiality in purple, because there's such an acceptance for nature and the various elements that come up and the various preferences that only in retrospect do we call it bestiality, when there's a love for all types of creatures and animal nature. So that's a simplification, but it's also relevant in understanding human nature. So for all intents and purposes, I put BT here, even though it may not be so relevant, and we shall see as we go along this process. But there is a pattern that will reveal something likely about BT. Then you have the SD in red. Everyone agrees that SD is harsh. So there's definitely SD, and my conclusion was that SD31 exists in the NTs because it's instinct, but in the red it also exists because dominance correlates. And then the dominance goes into the blue, which causes the ego to want conformity in a different light, conformity for the sake of ideology, right? As opposed to conformity for the sake of hierarchy in NT. Okay, so then once again in orange, the SD31 continues. In this case, it's apathy. It leads to apathy. If you don't follow the system, you get left behind. Basically what it is. SD31 does not exist in G, ironically. What exists? SD32. That's quite fascinating. So what is SD32? SD32 is the desire for people to not conform, to show their uniqueness. You have to. If you don't do it, there's a problem. And I noticed that I'm clearly not in green. I've went through a lot of this stuff. But again, I'm in blue sapphire, which is down here. And I noticed that I've been feeling really passionate. And my conclusion was there's a repeating pattern between the G and the BS. And the BS is a coincidence. I made it a smaller letter so people don't think that I did that on purpose. The BS is basically that the dualism comes back in, mysticism, and so that's because there's a pattern where the your collective mindedness, and so you reach it's a no self zone. So it technically is non-dual, but there is some dual, and the reason, and so there is a parallel between between blue sapphire and, in my opinion, and purple. So I'd have to look at that, but it does appear I had a strong interest in the purple and like looking at signs and all that stuff, but in a way that actually has practical relevance. So that's something to look into, but that's not the main conversation here. Blue sapphire, I consider SD32. Okay, so there's a parallel between the SD32 in BS and the parallel between SD32 in the G, which is green. And I concluded that the SD32 only happens most likely until a few years pass by, we can see more patterns every 8 stages. Every 8 stages. Or was it 7 stages? Okay. But we'll get there. All right. We're going through each. So in the G, we said there's possibly BT, and we can read our notes below. Why did I say BT was part of green? Because with love for nature and collective mindedness, because there's love for nature with collective mindedness, and less discrimination on who or what to include. Example, tree hugging, right? A love for caring for animals, the PETA. There's a desire for people to make sure that they're treating all creatures fairly. So it doesn't just, and with humans, it also extends to all living creatures because of the nature of the the nature of the BT that's present, as well as the B2. It was in green. All right. I said SD32 probably, but this is, probably still. I'm going to say probably. And the possibly was the B2. The BT. Now you got Y and T, SD2. So there's a pressure to be someone in yellow, and that leads to depression, which is necessary for the awakening. Right? And some people face this depression in orange, but no, this is a depression also transitions you to turquoise. So that depression is SD2. Oh, where's SD2? We said SD2. Oh, here it is. SD2 is basically masochism. So you put pressure on yourself and you don't really have a high self-esteem. The irony is this is also a stage of security. So, when you're actualizing, you don't overthink things. But there's also a pressure to keep moving. That's what generally happens. I met someone who has a pressure to keep moving in stage orange. But he does have a disorder. I'm not going to say names. So it could be, he is Pappy into coral, but there's bipolar where he just keeps moving around different stages. So someone to say bipolar caused that to happen. I generally don't say that's what bipolar does. But in his particular case, yeah, he taps into here and then he goes back to here. Taps into maybe here, he goes back to here. So he's centered in orange on average. Because of his condition. That's just how some people are. It's a coping mechanism for the psyche. There's not much you can do about it. Some people they won't change. They're very stuck in their ways. Fine. It's not to insult anyone, just some people, it's just how they function. And everyone functions in their own way, and no one's without dysfunction technically. I'm just trying to give people an idea of what's happening here. Now, Y2, you got mythics. Oh, that's something else. We're not dealing with Y2s. We're not dealing with any 2 stages for the 3s. Then turquoise, you have SD31. SD31 might be causing apathy towards animals. So this might be the source of apathy. So when you look at turquoise, they don't actually care about animals. They care about people. Ironically, but obviously they're not hostile. It's just you don't see them loving animals as much as green. And the reason for that is because the SD32, which is the nonconformity, mixed in with the BT. And the BT is not present with the TQ. It's mostly by humans. And there's a direct correlation between blue and not purple. Yeah, there's no I'm surprised. I'm surprised that TQ is not correlated to purple because we thought there would be a pattern of 4. But from my analysis so far, the parallel is between blue and not purple when it comes to BT. Unless you want to say, no, you're not going to go there. Because BT, obviously in BA, there was no emphasis on BT. It was like animal is the enemy. And in TQ, that happens again, but because of... So what that means is that transcendent stages, this brings more symmetry to the equation, is relevant when it comes to going above the body and not wanting to be animal-like. So you put aside the animal nature, even though the animal nature can overlap with non-dual experience, right? Like this monkey lizard is in having a non-dual experience. He's just one with everything. Everything is one and one is everything type of thing. Yeah, it's a metaphor, but some people have some kind of visions like this on DMT or whatever. Okay, so let's keep going. TQ, we got CL. CL instinctive includes mythic. That is CL. Oh no, CL is referring to coral here. So the INC, my claim is that the INC disappears after purple. That's why the Egyptians were into INC. They were not against it. So the INC, but the INC was not emphasized, and it was mostly a byproduct of non-duality or being one with nature. So there isn't, and being one with, not overthinking the situation. But generally speaking, incest would eventually be disregarded as recommended by a lot of purples. In order to branch to make the tribe bigger, that generally has to happen. It did not happen in Egypt, but that may have to do with dynastic procedure. So you have to look at whether or not those relationships were common outside of the leaders' vicinities. If they were common, that would be interesting to analyze. But I think it has to do with the dynasty and preserving the dynasty. But where does it begin? It begins, I had an opinion that it begins in here. I was during the stage, there's a show called Freud that came out on Netflix. Obviously, I'm basing it off of a coincidence, but there was also conversations I've had with people and things that came up that made me think that this could be happening in the psyche of a VT3CL. And so my conclusion was it starts here. Okay, and then I had a thing that INC is present here. So the conclusion I drew is that non-duality is correlated to incest. And over here, the reason why being one with nature correlated to incest was because non-duality was present in the sense of being one with nature. So one with nature. I should make this blue. I missed that. You have one with nature. Okay. We can read the footnote for 4. Close unit. Sex with other tribe members is likely. Oneness leads to less concern. Close unit. Oh, turquoise is close unit. They have sex with other tribe members. Oneness leads to less concern. But the idea is that tribalism might be associated with the idea of being close to each other. And when you're close to each other, then you are into sex. Okay, so the sexuality is harmonized with both tribalism and non-duality. And non-duality kind of feeds into tribalism as well. And that's stuff that I realized that whenever you have non-duality in groups, it leads to tribes and it leads to cults. And I think the Buddha knew this, so he was very careful to create a tribe that was not going to get lost in their ego. Very talented, very talented. Now, let's keep going to CL, we said was INC, TL was INC. We read that footnote. Oh, TL is also SD2, which is masochism. They put pressure on themselves to make sure that things are thriving, that there is a oneness. They put the pressure on themselves to make sure that agenda is taken care of. And that leads to depression when they can't accomplish that. Okay, what else? Okay, so let's keep going. So the AU, this is non-duality. This is null. So this is the stage of enlightenment. And if you ask me if AU is better than CL, the answer is no. They're just different. Let's see, 07. No ego, isolating. They rather go their own way. They're just present all the time. Everything is an opportunity to be blissful. CL is submerged. Oh, and then this is different from clear light, because clear light is submerged with the all. But AU is just null. So you could say one is null and the other is the all. The supermind has not been fully accessed at this stage. Everything is just tapping into these types of things. Okay, and in clear light, we create a new category called gravitates. And then there's a possibility of PD being accessed during this time. Exactly why, it's hard to say. Let's see, did I have a footnote? No footnote. The person in clear light becomes the person that is relevant or in their proximity, potentially adopting their ego. So it's a known thing that once you become the all, you also become all people. So this means that when you're talking to someone, you don't have many walls and there's a kindness to help them. No more desire. Okay, now the NT stage has an SD, and then but it also has a P. We said personalized. So the category of personalized simply means no more desire to stop desiring. So any ego can come up that relates to your personal psyche, and this overlaps with CL because a lot of people, they be how they are. They're not afraid to be how they are. That can get people into trouble. But if you have certain habits from before, that'll keep you in check. And BS 11, we said the lower left quadrant likely takes hold, fervent passion for human rights, and that correlates to G. SD32 is active. We said that SD2 light might apply, and that makes sense because the SD2 light correlates to both the TL, which was a second stage of the VT3, and there's also the SD2 but there's no SD2 in G because they direct the passion outwards, which is interesting. So the SD2, where else was the SD2? In Y. So the SD2 is kind of random in a way. I haven't found symmetry with the SD2. Oh no, this is SD2 too. Oh, it's SD2. They pressure themselves. So I was doing this last night, and you could see it got all messy, and it's just so hard to really put everything nicely. If someone could redo this, I don't even know who follows me that is that interested in what I'm working on. But yeah, that'll be great. That'll be one day if someone does this. That'll be nice. Let's read the notes. SD31 might be causing apathy towards animals. We said that. A pattern for BT may exist for every 8 stages. Okay, in the original BT of purple is generic and not created by defiance of battle between differences, which gets strengthened in blue. Less suppression could entail less desire and therefore less noticing when there is desire. Right. Non-dual stages, they don't pressure not desiring. Usually that comes from the blue. It comes from saying what is right and what is wrong, but that actually strengthens the resolve to create a battle. So if you look at the stage red, mythic, they put on helmets of bulls because they were the strongest animal. They don't mind looking like animals because there's nothing against the BT. The stigma against BT begins in the BA. And I've also thought about the stigma against BT might be as a result of PD. Because if you're an animal, then you're not a child, but that also doesn't make sense because the PD, the child is also like an animal. He's very instinctive, So, there are some questions there that don't make full sense. So I didn't really get into that because there wasn't enough concrete stuff to work with. I think we went through most of it, but let's keep going through the notes. Possibility that the PD happens every third stage without tear breaks, very likely starting with green. So where do we see third? Okay, so this one, we said dominance was present, but there's also the possibility that they like people that are smaller than them. That begins in R. It may imply so the PD might actually be compatible with SD, but not in a predatory sense, more just in a byproduct. If he's smaller than me, he's not scary. And so that's part of the appeal for women, is that they're weaker. So the man says, that's attractive to me. It's the same idea. So that's also something to consider. But then that could be applied to the BA with teachers. There's a base instinct of R and T. So therefore, when they teach, once in a while, if the ego comes out, they may, and there's no oversight, they may violate their own precepts. So there's that issue. But then you said every third stage. So the R is the main one that we're going with. That's the one I think is the most accurate. And then you got 1, 2, and 3. So so G is very focused on rights of children. So they want to make sure that they're safe, protected. There's no abuse. So in a sense, that's true PD. That's the PD that that's not bad. There's no rape involved. It's yeah. Okay, so then you got 1, 2, 3, and this I said was POS, but now it's probably PRB, because there's a pattern. I'm saying it's prob, but I'm still until we know for sure it's POS. So the CL is PD. And the reason why I say this is because they're instinctive, and I found that everything came up again. Now this could just be because of the wild nature of NT, and therefore there is no direct pattern, and it really correlates to the P of personalized, but it's hard to say, So for now, it's present for whichever reason. 1, 2, and then 3. And then I felt that PD begins again over here because you want to teach people the proper way, and so that's more like a parallel to G, which it's appropriate PD. It's just wanting to be friendly. And the same way Freud was criticized for what he said, what I'm saying here is that even the reason why you have a desire to be kind is because there's something reciprocal in the shadow. So I'm saying that the love for those that are smaller than you and those that are less fortunate or whatever, that is coming from I'm just going to make sure that is coming from, I just want to make sure it was going because I had this other video going. That has come from PD, even though you never want to admit it's from PD. Because, it's just not comfortable for people to admit how their shadow is working, something that they're never conscious of. Okay. Past CL, you cannot truly label a specific ego, but you can use terminology. We said that likely parallel from G to B, showing 2 tiers carries a pattern in general. But TQ to BA is clearer, parallel, controlling an atmosphere. Yeah, TQ and BA show that there's a clear pattern of transcendence, that in order to, that every transcendent stage you want control over a situation. So let's follow the logic. You have TQ, you have BA, which clearly wants control, and you have TQ that wants control. And then transcendent stage of clear light. Now it could be, I noticed that topaz wants control, and I hold that there's always a transitionary point, a nuanced color between any third stage. What am I saying? Third stage? It's a second tier already. No, there's nuanced colors in general. Okay, fine. Okay, so there's nuanced colors. This is not relevant to the U2 to the CL. It's really relevant for the just generic nuances. So because there's the concept of generic nuances means there's always going to be things overlapping in the next stage, and that's just what happens. So I find that there is no sense of control, but I also find that people who reach CL, they return to TQ, and it's really easy to return to a parallel stage because they're all the same thing. There is no time, right? It's all the same stuff, just a different setting, and so therefore there really aren't tiers. They're just one tier, and you're just going through time on a parallel zone. But I don't want to get too philosophical there. But what I'm trying to say is, even though there may be linear progression and stuff like that, there are really only 5 stages or 4 stages even, with 2.5, with 4 being 2, or 3 being 2. But that's not so relevant right now. So what we're saying over here, what was the last thing that I said? I was up so late last night, like 4 a.m, finishing this up, talking to myself like all night, like, does this make sense? What about that? How about this? I'm accessing like the Akashics to know what other people are going to say based on the logic that they already use and stuff like that. But okay, so the controlled setting might be true. But there's also the idea that the CL goes their own way, right? The CL goes their own way, and so what does that teach you? It teaches you that it's separate. So either you could say it's separate, or you could say it's the same. They do believe in parameters. It just changes. You could say because it changes after the 12 stages, right? This creates a new zone of reality almost that separates itself from everything else. So CL might be completely different than all other stages, and therefore everything after CL is more of like a different paradigm almost. And that's what you might have to apply. So there's either the different paradigm idea, or it's just every 12 stages, and then we're going to have to live 100 other years to see who reaches these stages, and then what applies to which person. But that's an impracticality. So, I wouldn't go there. I have a lot of stake in using quantum computers and, using previous random samples to predict people's decisions, and then apply that to a larger population. And companies already do this to predict advertisements, so they really should apply this for the benefit of the psychological community, where we can finally understand that free will is an illusion, and how does free will get affected. So those are bigger questions that overlap and connect. But it's just hard to get people on board when the companies want to make their money, and they really have to feel embarrassed about not helping the public before they decide to be on board with projects like these. Possibility that the PD happens every third, we said. ST2 probably more common for feminine stages. We every second stage is a feminine stage. Feminine stage refers to feminine community-based stages, or when expectations are high. Oh, that's a separate thing. Or when expectations are high. It appears every third stage has an SD2, but SD3, one of an NT, cancels out the SD2 and pushes it off to the next stage. So this is to explain why there was no SD2. There was no SD2 for stage Topaz. They were in the upper right quadrant, more or less, or they're more practical minded. I don't even know if they're practical. It's a different world. And you have the INC, you have a pattern of 7s. So this is basically saying there's no pattern of INC except for every 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is just a suggestion. But then afterwards, I would say that no, it's related to non-duality. That when there's no separation and there's no similarity is an arbitrary thing, and then you can love more people and stuff like that. There's more potential to love yourself as well as, there's no survival is a concept, and so therefore incest it becomes more possible in that regard. But the 7s is just a hypothesis. There's no way to really test that yet, from my understanding. Sense of oneness with nature, Mother Gaia. Every seventh pair with NT. Yeah, and then I think we decided that the INC is present for non-dual stages. I just can't find where I wrote it. Here, let me see if I can go to INC. This includes and something else. All right. Yeah, well, I'm telling you now. INC is non-dual. All right, so there you have my video. Just to throw it out there so it's on the web. I hope you gained. Like I said, this is complicated stuff. No one's really exploring this, or at least in the way that I'm doing it, because I'm the one who created all these charts. So, have a good one.